Okay, so with our control statements, they pretty much work to help us to have specific elements about our program. For example, the first control statement we can work with is an if statement, whereby we have if, and then we have a condition within the if statement, and then we want an action for whatever it is that we want to have. So, for example, a simplest use for our if statement can be as follows. We can create a variable called x, and then we say our x is equal to 5. And then our condition can be x is greater than 5. Then our cout becomes a result of what we want this statement to signify or to show us. So, for example, we can then say true. Okay, without running this program, do you think that what we have typed out there gives us a result, or it will not give us a result? We have said if x is less than 5, then we want to print the output, it's true. Guys, the statement that you see there, and why? If x is less than 5, then we want the output to be true. Will it display anything? Why not? Why would why won't it give us a result? If we are saying if x is less than 5 and we want it to print true, let's run the program. So it doesn't give us anything. Why doesn't it give us anything? If x is less than 5, then the result is true. Right. You guys are not practicing. This means I'll give you some assignments today so that you practice. And then in the next lecture, no one comes in without that assignment. Right. So we are starting and saying x gives us 5. So x is equal to 5. We are then saying our condition is x should be greater than 5. So what this then means, our condition cannot be met because we are saying x should be greater than 5, but it is not being met, so we won't get a result. But however, if we put an equal sign after the sign, the less than, we should then get a result. So the fact that we then put an equal sign and then a less than or greater than, we should be able to then get our option, which is true or false. Okay. At the same time, that is a single conditional statement. We can then have a conditional statement that is giving us two options, or that can get us two options from the very same conditional statement. Let's put an extra statement or an extra set of elements that we want to work with that will then give us more conditions or more options to our conditional statement. Maybe. Okay, so we want to add more options to our conditional statement, right? That's the first set of conditions. The next set, we want to say the following. If our x is equal to 5, then we want to give a result. Otherwise, if it's not equal to 5, we also want a secondary result. So what this then means now is with our content or with our context, we can then be able to put two different conditions to say what we want to do. We want to say if our x is equal to 5, we then state that value reached the limit. If it's not equal to 5, we want to say value below the limit. So this then means now with our conditional statement, we are then checking for the value of 5, and we need exactly a 5 for us to then know that we have reached our limit. We need a value below the limit in the event that we are not at our limit. So what this then means with our conditional statements, we can then be able to measure up how we can use each of them. So if you run that code, you actually then be able to see that you can be able to view a result. And that result works with the options that you are hoping to. Right. So that is an if statement. One way we can also then have a variation of our if statement is we could also say outside of the normal if, which is this one, the nested if. No, it's not the nested if, it's the conditional if, where we've got the if and the else. We can also have a nested if statement. So we're saying we can then have two options within an if statement, whereby we can say if our x equals y equals to 5, sorry, and then we open and we close brackets, we then say if this is the case, we want to say x plus plus. And then when we say x plus plus, we then increment. And then at that point, we want to say if our x is now equal to 6, we want to put a C out and state that we have reached our limit. Like that. So what does this mean? It means the first if statement, which we can see there, it gives us x is less than or equal to 5. We are working with a condition that checks for our value for x. If our x is less than 5, we have met our condition. If our x is also equal to 5, we have also met our condition. In the second instance, we are then checking for an exact value for 5. And in our last element, we're then checking for the values that we want, which is x is equal to 5. We then increment the value for x. If we then get to 6, then we have reached our limit. So an example of how we can actually work with this is we might want to check for values that are changed, or we might want to check for elements that we might have to have control over. So one such example can be, let's say you're getting records that you need a total cutoff time. So our cutoff time can be, in its simplest form, after 10 cycles or 5 cycles or however number of cycles, we then want to be able to stop our program from running at that particular instance. So the next thing we want to do is let's quickly create a new project. And in that project, we want to add a different kind of if statement that will have some extra content that we can work with. So let us proceed. So let's do this one step by step, and we want to get how we can control a number of occurrences within our program. So we want to create an if statement, and then with our if statement, we want to have a program that gives us some condition. So like we said, our condition, we need a with our conditions, we need to have a variable. And then our variable then gives us access to everything else within our program. So we can have our variable being c is equal to 0. That then becomes our variable. And then we want to iterate this value. So we can create a tag, and our tag can be loop. With our loop, we then want to say at this particular point, we want to iterate the value proceed. So what this then means is we've created our variable. We've also created our tag, which links with a go-to statement. From there, we then want to start running our program. Okay, so to run our program, we then do the following. We say if our C is less than 5, we want to go to loop, and then from there, after this is done, we put a C out, and we put an end line. So if this is done, end of program. Like that. So with that, our program is done, or we have done what our program requires. So maybe let's talk about what we've got there. That is our this is our code. Let me copy it and put it in another platform so that we can explain what this code is doing or what this code is supposed to do. Let's proceed. So what this then means now is we can be able to add to this. We can say we want our C to be less than 50, right? So if it's less than 15 and we run it, we'll then be able to get values from 1 to 40. What that then means now is we can be able to control how our output can be displayed. So the idea of a control statement is to be able to control the output that we've got to get the result that we want to get. So whilst we're working on this, can you do the following for me? I'm just going to type it out there so that you can see what we want to do. We want to be able to put a statement. So statement that can do the following. We want to have a variable. Let's say our variable is called x, but we want our x to give us a range of values, right? So on the lower level of our x, we want our x to be greater than 15, right? But on the second level of our x, we want our x to be less than 35. So we want to be able to print a value for x that is greater than 15 but is less than 35, and we want all the numbers in between. So we want to be able to print 16 to 34. Can we do that? Proceed. We want to add more to our learning. This then becomes our question for our next program or our next project. But now we want to have a different kind of conditional statement. So this was an if statement, but we now need to have a statement that considers every possible option that we can have. So to have such a program, we need to create a new project file. And then in that project file, we want to be able to call it a for loop. That's the next kind of loop we want to work with. So what this then means now is with our loop, we want to be able to declare something that we can be able to use within our program or with the way our program should run. So we can put a variable called I, and then our I is equal to 0. Or rather, we can just leave it as I without initializing. When we are then working with our loop, we simply put for, we open brackets, we then say I is equal to 0. We then say I is less than 10. We then say I iterates. And then from there, we want to put C out. We want the value for I. We want a new line. We want an end line like that. So we save that value. And then this then gives us the output that we are hoping for. Whereby with our output, we should then get our values for I. Okay, I just made one small error. Let me fix it. I put my I and then I put my brackets so that we can display the value for I. And then it should then give us all the values between our 0 and 10. So which is 0 to 9. Let me remove that bit. So that we can see the output of our values. So that is a for statement. So let's explain what our for statement does. Our for statement simply gives us the following. It gives us the for keyword. It then gives us our condition, whereby our condition starts with I is equal to 0, I is less than 10, I item. So the one thing we must also at least understand with our loops, we then now need to know how we use our operators. So our operators are our equal to, our less than, or greater than, our iteration, which is plus plus, our go to, like we used in the previous example. All these help us to at least work with our conditional statements in a slightly better. Okay, so we are still working with the for statement, whereby we can say for. In this particular instance, we want to rearrange our values. We'll copy that, we paste, and then now we want to say our I is equal to 11. We then say our I should be less than, or equal to or equal to 0. And then our I, we then put a decrement. Let's run that code. Right. Guys, I'm continuing with the recording. So I will just correct our code so that we see what we want to do. We then put a greater than sign. I remove the equal sign, and then if I run the program, we'll be able to view the values that we've got. So we're then saying our I starts from 11 to 1. Let's actually just put a C out to give a demarcation for the two options. So second for statement. Please make sure you copy exactly as I'm projecting on your screen so that you can be able to view and see what each element does. So if I run it now, I will be able to get my result. The next loop we want to work with is a while loop. We want to create a while loop, and our while loop is as follows. So we want a new project. We go to Go. We then call it a while loop. We click on Next. We then click on Finish. So how does our while loop work? Our while loop works pretty much similar to our for, and similarly our if statement, whereby we need to declare our value, which can be I, and then our I is equal to 0. And then we need a condition whereby we say while I is less than 10, sorry, while I is less than 10, we want to put I, and we want to increment it, and then we want to display the value of I, like that. Right, program yetu. Okay, so let us proceed. Let's have a mix of our while and our if and our for. I did it. Right. So let's have one more program. Let's have one more program, and we see how this works. And with this program, I can give you an in-class thing to work on. Right. So we want a while with a if statement. So here's how our statement should read, or our statement should be. We want to have an integer, which we can call m, and then our m is equal to 0. It's being displayed on your Google. We then say while our value is 1. We then want to do the following. We want to say m iterates, and then if we get our m being greater than 10, we want true rate, like that. That's the end of our code. Let's explain what this code is doing. So in general, what this code is doing is we are creating a variable called that is now equal to 0. And then we have a while statement. In our while statement, we just put a condition where we are saying it's 1, and then 1 simply means anything that we find within our while statement is active or is not something that is uh, not positive, if we can put it that way. Or rather, we are saying with our 1, we then get to say everything within the while statement can be displayed. From there, we then add 1 to our value for m, and then when we get our m being greater than 10, we want to end the value, or we want to end the loop. I did it. I don't know if you had tried with our statements. And with our statements, we want to make this program a little bit bigger than what we have done so far. And we also want to implement some of the concepts that we worked with in the previous lesson, where we were looking at functions. So we want to go to File, New, and then we select a project. We select Console Application, C++, and we say Control Project. Okay, so with our control project, we want to be able to do the following. We want to be able to call our function, which is loops. So we'll create a function called loops, and our loops would be a void loops. And then our void loops will then contain our content that we want within our loops. We want to create a variable that we'll use throughout the loops, whereby the first one would be I, the next one would be J, the next one would be K, like that. So for our loops, we then start with an if. Whereby we are saying our I is equal to 5. So if our I is greater than 5, we want to display that our I is greater than 5, like that. So what this then means is we have initialized our I. We have then said if I is greater, sorry, that is less than. If I is greater than 5, then we want to say that I is greater than 5. However, if I is not greater than 5, what do we want to do? We now want to put a for loop where our for loop would then have j is equal to 0, j is less than I, and then j iterates, plus plus, like that. So what this then means is we can then be able to display our value for j, whereby we say C out, we put our j, our end line, we close our brackets. Or rather, before we add, let's just explain what this is doing. In the first instance, we've got our I is equal to 5, and then if our I is greater than 5, we want to print I is greater than 5. If it's not greater than 5, we then want to print for j is equal to 0, j is less than 5, j iterates, and then C out, we get the value for j. So it's supposed to give us numbers between from 0 to 4 so that we get to match up what the loop requires. At the same time now, we can also do another loop, whereby in this loop we want a for loop, whereby we can then say for, we redefine the values for j equals to 10, and then we say j is less than, yes, j is less than, sorry, j, yes, I think less than will be okay, equal to 0. And then we say j minus minus, and then we want to give the output of j. Maybe I can just copy that. right? And then after this, we want to say if our j equals 4, we then want to break. What this then means now is we want to be able to put values between 10 and 0. And then the moment we get up to 4, we want to stop the program running. So that is what that line will then. So the last loop is our while. Okay. So for our while loop, we want to use the k, and we say k is equal to 10. No, let's actually not initialize k there. Let's say while we open and we close brackets, k is less than 10. We want to then initialize our k. So we say k is equal to 0. You can say k is less than or equal to 10. We want to iterate the value of k. We want to give a C out. And our C out should give us the value for k, like that. Okay, and then for our while statement, we then want it to not be equal to 10. So we want to say if k equals 10, we then want to break, like that. So I think we are done with our code. Let's explain it stage by stage. At this particular point, let's also put outputs. So at this point, we say C out, and then this becomes if statement. We also put a C out. This becomes for statement. And then we put a C out there as well. We want a while statement. Like that, and we are good to go. Okay, for our for statement, I think the sign was wrong. Yes. Now it's giving us exactly what we would want. So our if, our for, and our while statements are now in order.